All right, diving into the metaverse and also into new evolution companies is going to be what we're getting into today. I think you're going to like this one. My name is Paul Barrow. Welcome back to Tech Path. Today we're going to dive into a project that is within the Solana ecosystem, but more importantly, what it means to the metaverse and also what it means to maybe Web 3.0, because I think that is really where a lot of this is heading. If you have been watching our show for very long, you understand we get into a lot of deep end technology and really understanding right now where Web 3.0 and Web 2.0 are starting to diverge and really make some interesting moves, because there's a lot of companies that have started to make the break. And what's interesting to me is if you follow where the money is leading, then you kind of see the evolution of the Web 2.0 guys starting to move in this direction. And you'll get what I'm talking about when we dive into this. Before we get started, let's get into a couple of things. One is, of course, the market cap for today. Let's take a look quickly here, holding at 2.7 trillion, 24-hour volume, 994. Ooh, man, almost $100 billion moving on that. That's amazing. Bitcoin holding at 43.4 and ETH very strong at 19.5 on dominance. And you can kind of see Bitcoin's price hovering in and out. We haven't had a lot of movement with Bitcoin, Ethereum. Both have been very stable somewhat, but also a little bit questionable. And I think a lot of this has been just the amount of news and information that is kind of sucking the wind out of the crypto market in general, mostly through a lot of the ecosystems that are being built. And this is everything from Solana, Polygon, Avalanche, you name the big one, Polkadot, obviously with their parachain auctions just finishing up. There's a lot moving in the space, and I want to get into the token today, and that is RenderToken. It's under Render Network. And really, when you look at what Render is trying to do, I'll try to break this down simply in essence of, if you can think of where the metaverse is going and understand the visual aspects of what we're going to need in this new era, almost think about this when you think about the internet in Web 3.0. What was the number one thing that you knew we were going to need eventually? It was e-commerce. It was the ability to exchange and do transactions and do business on the internet. That was going to be the number one. That was kind of the evolution of where the dot bomb really started, was because the e-commerce engines that needed to be built in that very early stage. The next evolution of that, of course, has been all around content and social media. And of course, we all know where that has come from. Now we know that even Facebook has looked at moving quickly into this space, new name Meta. And the number one thing that I think we're going to be dealing with is the graphics side of the metaverse. And what does that mean when you look at the companies that are going to be out there, both from an entertainment side, gaming side, and also just in general, the amount of things we're going to see coming over from the traditional Web 2.0 world into what we're going to see in Web 3.0. So if you look back a little bit here on Render and the website, distributed GPU rendering on the blockchain, I love that blockchain image there with that. It's a leading provider of decentralized GPU-based rendering solutions, revolutionizing the digital creations. And I think this is kind of interesting. Their CEO, this was founded in 2016, and Jules Urbach, he is the guy behind this. And they also have a very good advisor group, but Jules is one of those forward thinkers. He's one of those guys that you pick out in a crowd when he comes in, and whether he's talking about what he's doing from a technology standpoint or what he's doing from a company standpoint, I think a lot of people look to him as will be one of the pioneers in what's happening in the metaverse. And I think this is going to be interesting to see on his vision, which is to democratize GPU cloud rendering. And let me kind of zoom in on this, because this is really what it's all about. They're designed to connect users looking to perform render jobs with people who have idle GPUs to process the renders. Owners would connect their GPUs to the render network in order to receive and complete rendering jobs using Octane Render, which is basically the protocol, and then send render to the individual performing the render work, render being the token, and OTOI would receive a small percentage of render for facilitating, that's the company obviously, the transaction and running the network. So it kind of has a lot of similarities to what is happening over at Helium. If you remember, we did a video with Helium and their founder, and what they're trying to do from the side of just Wi-Fi sharing, open network, I have a feeling is kind of, well, it has a lot of similarities to what Render is and OTOI is, and their token is really trying to do here within Render the company. And I think this is where we get into some very intriguing application use case scenarios because of the fact that we've seen so much growth in the GPU business and the amount of companies that are basically housing nodes and or equipment that could handle these kinds of rendering. So I think with this decentralized scenario that could really play into this is going to get very interesting very fast. Once they've registered with their idle GPUs on the Render network, they'll basically become a node operator and are able to render basically tokens. It's kind of like farming in a way, if you think about it. It has a lot of mining elements to it, but you're utilizing a rendering protocol to essentially earn that tokenization of it. So I like that. And the fact that they're doing this, accepting jobs from users in need of rendering work known as creators, who will send their files to the Render network where they are assigned operators. I would just wonder where all of this is going to come from. The question I would have on this project right now would be more about how that ecosystem is going to kind of plug into real world Web 2.0 requirements and needs. Because if they can build out the node network itself quick enough and then get just a baseline of companies and or service or people needing services on the GPU side of this, especially if we start to see this moving into the metaverse where companies are trying to take existing 2D, 3D stuff and, hey, listen, I need to go ahead and accelerate that project. We're doing something on a metaverse scenario, or recreation, or reassignment of some of my proprietary art, those kind of things. All that could eventually roll up into the Render network and, in essence, give you a whole new, I think, experience when you look at just graphics generation in general. And if you also think about this, you've got remember, we're going to see continued pressure on this is probably the only concern I would have, continued pressure at least over the next 20 years on graphics capabilities. Reason because you're going to need those kind of things to essentially run mining rigs, et cetera, or versions of it, even though we do see the ASICs and some of the different advanced mining rigs that are really designed for Bitcoin. But in proof of work projects, obviously most GPUs are the engine that runs all of this. So is there enough, kind of idle hardware out there, or is there enough potential for new hardware going into the space that would eventually become node operators to go in this direction? Because this could become a profit-making enterprise for some companies that might end up trying to spin up like a miner would. So this will be interesting to see how this starts to flow. I just wonder if they're going to get into any applications where they might look at seeing space from mining facilities that would essentially become rendering farms for something like what Render is trying to do. So very interesting stuff. And if you look at just their group of who is on here on their founder and advisors, obviously Jules Urbach, the founder, but you also look in here, you've got J.J. Abrams, CEO of Bad Robot. Obviously we know J.J. Abrams, very tied to Hollywood and just entertainment in general. Ari Emanuel, all right, that's WME-IMG. This is another major company that's tied to entertainment. You've got Brendan Eich, who is Brave Software. You've got Beeple over there. I mean, these are some interesting people in the sense that when you look at a project, this is the first place that I will go and understand a little bit more about what they're trying to do. And if you haven't listened to Jules, his video or his presentation that he did at the Solana conference in Lisbon here recently, I would just say, just do a quick search for Solana, Jules Urbach, in Lisbon. He really started to talk a lot about kind of the evolution of where the metaverse may go and how and what we need to make that happen. And his speech or his talk there at the conference was pretty eye-opening even for me in understanding Web 3.0 and the transition that we're in the space of. I think the big challenge, and I think this is something we're going to continue to see, is where the developers are going to be coming from to continue to help accelerate these projects in that direction. Solana is definitely on the right track. The amount of people that are coming into the Solana ecosystem and just what it means to maybe the rest of crypto is going to be very interesting, because it is now a fight for the developing architect of Web 3.0. And if you think about just the taproot that just recently happened on Bitcoin, with what that means to, because that was really, I mean, that was it is the biggest advancement and or upgrade that we've seen. And of course, with that, it's trying to do a lot of what we've seen in layer 2. And that is speed up transactions, start to diverse, and get a little bit more effective into the marketplace to be able to keep up with a lot of these newcomers like Solana, Avalanche, Cardano, etc. And obviously, we already know about what Ethereum's trying to do with 2.0. So with all of that in play right now, there is so much happening in these ecosystems. And Render is one that I'm very, very close to in terms of watching this project really become something very interesting. Full disclosure, I do own this token. Another thing, when we do these market movers, remember, market movers are straight up, we do the research, we'll get you some news based on what our assessment is, and then we'll do an analysis, run some of our own data, and we're going to deliver a chart to you. But the number one thing, this is not investment advice. The best thing I want you guys to do is really dive into your own research. But understand, maybe we've uncovered a project for you that you want to look at, or maybe you're very passionate of where the metaverse is going. This is one of those targets that you want to be looking at. I want to talk about just what decentralized and how this all evolves, because this is also tied, I think, to decentralized social media. And this is something that is also on Solana's blockchain, which is going to be different, because remember, what we see visually and what we're going to experience in the metaverse, I think a lot of people may not necessarily truly realize the first adventure into what that may or may not look like. It may be a real world experience that has overlays. There may be all other types of things that we'll have and start to integrate with. But the main thing that we are going to have to be able to engage in there is going to be identity. Now, identity is going to be most likely tied to social media. And if you look at where this one is going, decentralized social media on Solana's blockchain could change how fast we enter the metaverse. Reddit, this is Reddit co-founder and also just launched 776 founder Alexis Ohanian. They're partnering now on the Solana with the Solana Foundation to create a $100 million initiative to build decentralized tools for social media on Solana blockchain. So there's some very key things here that will happen. This was an announcement also over at the Lisbon conference just last week. Both Ohanian and Solana co-founder Raj Gokul believe changes in the metaverse ecosystem will be happening extremely fast. This is something that I want you to pay attention to right here. And this is a high-performance blockchain like Solana. There's unprecedented opportunity to fuse social and crypto in a way that feels like Web 2.0 with social product, with the added incentive of empowering users with real ownership. This is where it's going to get very interesting in the blockchain, tying in all of this virtual space. And what he said here, Solana said cycles are getting faster in the crypto industry, and we will be living in the metaverse faster than anyone thinks it's going to happen. So this is essentially the Solana main guy with what is the founder of what is Open Web Commentary, Reddit, and Alexis Ohanian, who has lived his entire career in Web 2.0 and in social media. And they both are coming together with an understanding of where Web 3.0 is going. When you take a look at that, and then you look at the tool set that comes underneath that, like Render and many other projects that we'll be highlighting here on the show, is now you start to understand the architecture in which this new era is being built, Web 3.0. Web 3.0 is the biggest thing that has happened to business and to, I think, just society since the internet was created. And if you have been around long enough to see that era rise out of the ashes and kind of become something, you understand what we're really doing here, what's really happening here. And I was interested in one of the statements that Alexis had on the video. He said, hey, listen, we just see a transition here from Web 3.0 to building the new internet of the next 100 years. probably nothing to really worry about. And that was kind of an interesting little statement there. But anyway, I know you guys are wanting to take a look at the chart. Let's take a look at the render chart real quick, just to kind of give you an idea of where this token has come from. We ran a sentiment. This was done back in early November. And as you can see, many of these projects will move quickly into and kind of come out of oblivion into a very active project once that they start getting some life and some air on people really kind of understanding what they're trying to do. But this was running at 68.51. The amplification started to flip on this one at that time. Obviously, we saw a big upswing. Another little dip right here at 70.21 on sentiment. Amplification continued to hold out on that, and you can kind of see the movement right here that started to take render up, and we pulled our last sentiment bubble right here on the 12th of November. Sentiment continued to climb at 79.61 and an amp holding at 80. Now, we don't see amplification scores in the 80s very often. Usually it identifies two things. One, it either identifies that the market has a massive move happening right now. Typically Bitcoin's on, doing some crazy things, or Ethereum's on a big rise. But rarely do we see something like this where it's a brand new project like Render. And I shouldn't say it's a brand new project. This has been going on since 2017. But the point is that the evolution of this project is now in place. It's starting to become a reality for them. So they're already starting to see, and I think a lot of people are starting to see where this project is going. So if you look at where this is flying out to, and we'll follow along here just a little bit of where this is going. Right to here, we had jockeyed into $3.59. Then a nice another little pump after a dip, and this brought it at 426. And here we are outside of the rails right now. Even though we did see this coming, which is this little section right here, we're seeing a high right at the $5 mark. But right now we do have some interesting points right here at a 553 range. And if you look at where else we may be going with this over the next few weeks, this is where it gets really interesting, because it's got a little bit of an opportunity to go sideways here for a little bit. We may be underestimating this one, but right here at the top, we're looking at somewhere around the $7 mark for Render. And this again is still hovering by the early December date. Right now, our data is still very strong on this, mainly because of the freshness of what's happening at the Solana conference. But definitely on a potential here to see a little sideways action, and I think we're going to see a little bit more of a jump here on Render as we start to see things moving forward. When you're looking at Metaverse, and when you're looking at the projects under the Solana ecosystem, the Avalanche ecosystem, and also even Polygon and especially Polkadot, there's a lot of strategic plays that are being made right now. Because remember, right now the biggest fight that the blockchain is in for is talent. So it's all about the amount of developers that start to pour into these ecosystems and into these projects, because those are going to be the ones that break out and become something, whether it's an NFT game, whether it's a metaverse game, whether it is an evolution of something in terms of a business element that's being reformatted for Web 3.0. All of those are going to require a core development architecture of teams and also just talent. Now, part of this, remember, we're going to see a lot of companies, I won't say just fall, but they are definitely going to see a lot less transaction, or they're going to see a lot less growth, I should say, a lot less growth in where the market is going to go once that we kind of move into the space of kind of our initial push in the market, meaning we're going to see this bull run evolve, and it's going to continue to climb, and then we're going to see a dive. We're going to see a fall off on this, and at that point, you're going to see a few projects that will start to fail. When that occurs, whoever scoops up those developers are in the right time at the right place. Those are the projects that you need to really watch. So there's a lot of activity happening here. This happened almost verbatim in Silicon Valley in the early 2000s, where we saw a huge offshore move of trying to get more talent, but then a massive loss of companies in the space during the dot bomb. And we saw this massive push of talent onto the market. And all these companies that swooped in and grabbed them up, guess who they are? You know, they're the guys that essentially built the ecosystem in social media, built the ecosystem at Amazon Web Services and Amazon, and became what is now most of Silicon Valley. So I see that thing happening once again here within the blockchain and Web 3.0. So a lot's happening here. When you look at Render being a big part of this, and we're going to see probably more and more companies trying to come in and compete at this level. So be on the lookout for those. Render may not be the one, but that particular service or that application protocol that's going to be needed for transcending into the metaverse, definitely going to be a factor. It's kind of like data, because you're going to need, whether you need data, or if you look at what is happening over at Arweave, or you look even at Filecoin for that matter, there's a lot of companies that are positioning to get ready for this kind of scenario where the next evolution of Web 3.0 is going to need all these core underlying services. Rendering of graphics is going to be a massive one. So stay tuned right here. If you guys are listening in over on the podcast, the number one thing you can do, of course, is, subscribe, but you can also jump over here to the YouTube channel, because this is where you're going to get the charts. It's where we're going to give you kind of the painting of the picture of our own research, and then giving you the insights that we're pulling off of the CPI, which is just our crypto power index that helps us run both sentiment and amplification on a lot of these projects. We've been able to pick and really chart a lot of these fairly accurately. Again, remember, it depends on how far out the data comes in. Most of the time, we're about a week before the data gets a little mushy, and we need to rescore it to get a fresh set of data credentials, which is what we call them. But if you guys, of course, have an idea for the show, or maybe you have some Solana projects or some Polygon projects or some Polkadot projects that you think have the kind of brevity, the kind of impact that a render project might have on the metaverse, drop them in the comments below. It's what we want to hear from you. Hopefully we can dive into those, because believe me, things are coming at us so fast. We cannot keep up with every major project. We get introduced new projects that we've known about, kind of been watching, but hadn't done the deep dive, and then are kind of kicking ourselves going, we should have done this one earlier. You, the Diamond Circle community, can help us get through that. But first thing, join the Diamond Circle. It's free. It's easy to get to. We do a lot of drops now. We're starting to drop more and more. We've got an NFT gaming guide coming up that we're going to drop to you guys, along with more of these insights on these metaverse tokens and projects. So be on the lookout for those. It'll hit your email, and it only comes out to the Diamond Circle. In many cases, it's not stuff we present here on the channel. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, just do it at Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.